Ball pythons can make amazing pets, but even though we breed ball pythons, we know that there are drawbacks to this species. So for this week's video, we wanted to dive into the 5 major drawbacks of ball pythons because we think that it is imperative that new reptile keepers understand the species that they are working with, so that way both the animal can thrive and the keeper can have an amazing experience with that animal in order to make sure that they stay in the reptile hobby rather than getting an animal that they feel like they can't take care of and then they end up getting out. So we hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you do, please don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe. But my name's Steven with Leviathan, and let's get to it. The biggest drawback to ball pythons is something that you are going to hear all the time, and this is the idea that ball pythons go on hunger strikes. And this is a fact. Ball pythons are going to go for weeks, maybe even months at some point in their life where they don't eat anything. And for a brand new reptile keeper, this can be really, really stressful because most people don't have experience with an animal that can go 3 months without eating anything and be perfectly healthy. But that is something that happens quite a bit in reptiles, and it happens quite a bit in ball pythons. So this is a drawback, and the reason why it's a drawback is because it often leads to a lot of new reptile keepers getting into negative emotional states, potentially spending a lot of money by taking the animal to a vet when they really didn't need to, and it can make them feel like that they are not doing a good job at caring for their animal because they're not eating in the way that they think that they should. So even though I personally don't think that a ball python going on a hunger strike is really anything to be worried about, to a new reptile keeper, this 1000% is a drawback, and it can create a situation where you may not enjoy caring for a ball python all the time, especially if they are a finicky eater and it makes you worried about the health of your animal. The second drawback of ball pythons is that they do require specific husbandry requirements, such as humidity or temperatures, that aren't achievable just given most people's normal households. And oftentimes you need to buy additional equipment, such as a heat mat and a thermostat, or you need to do a lot of misting, especially if you're using a large display style enclosure, in order to make sure that the humidity levels remain at a point where the ball python can have healthy sheds. And with all of these different things combined, it isn't necessarily hard work, but it is additional work in order to care for the animal appropriately. And if somebody is looking for an animal with essentially no maintenance, or they come into owning a ball python under the idea that they are low to no maintenance, this can create a situation where they are not taking care of their animal appropriately. The animal can have adverse health issues, and it feels like that the ball python was more work than they were led on to believe. And again, I don't necessarily think that it is very hard to care for a ball python because you can just mist it on a regular cadence, and you can make sure that your heat mat is plugged into a thermostat and the thermostat can control the temperature. But overall, if somebody's not prepared for this, it can be a learning curve, it can be a challenge, and it can be a drawback to owning ball pythons because these things are non-negotiable. The next drawback to owning a ball python is that there is a ton of information online about the species, but some of that information is outdated, some of that information conflicts with other sources, and some of the information is just plain wrong. And there is no real way to know when you're very first starting what information is good and what information is bad. So because of this, there is a lot of situations where you can think that you are doing things the right way, such as maybe you do your research and you learn that you should feed your animal, your ball python, in a separate enclosure from where they primarily live, so that way they don't develop cage aggression. This information is wrong. It is outdated, and it has been proven that ball pythons don't develop cage aggression. and that there's no territorial aspect in a ball python. But it can create a situation where if you're feeding outside of the bin and then bringing them back into the regular enclosure, that animal may feel stressed when they're being moved and regurgitate the meal, and that can lead to negative health consequences. But that doesn't mean it will always happen. So because of all of these different things, the plethora of information for ball pythons, it can be hard to understand what is the right way to care for them. And this is a drawback for this species. In the same vein of too much information for the species, another drawback is that there is a debate. There is not an agreed upon way to care for ball pythons. Depending on the segment of the hobby that you are looking at, a breeder may talk about how you should keep your ball python in a tub system because it's easier to regulate humidity, it's easier to regulate temperature, and it's easier to clean the enclosure and make sure that your ball python is living in a good, sterile environment free of bacteria and free of disease. But if you are looking at the pet side of the hobby, they may recommend that a ball python stays in at minimum a 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot long vivarium, so that way they can have enough space in order to fully stretch out and climb if you bring in enrichment opportunities. And it's not that either one of these approaches are wrong, but they are prioritizing different aspects of the ball python's well-being, and that depending on the information that you are getting, they may present the other side as being absolutely terrible for the health of the animal. And because of this, it can create, again, a situation where you don't know what the right answer and the right way to care for a ball python. In addition, the debate often leads to situations where if you show that you are keeping your ball python in a specific style of enclosure, regardless of what that style is, the people who don't agree with you will publicly attack you on social media because the way that you're keeping your ball python is shown to be not the way that they think is best for it. So again, there are situations where it is plain wrong and you shouldn't keep your ball python in a specific style. But when it comes to the prevalent, public, and most popular forms of keeping ball pythons, I personally believe that there is a ton of evidence that shows that either option and in between can work really, really well for ball pythons. But given the way that social media is and the way that people interact on the internet, it is likely going to look like that you are either going to be one extreme or the other, and that there is no room for subtlety or spectrum within these different styles of keeping. And this can turn people off from keeping a ball python because they don't want to have to deal with the controversy of going against one of these different directions. The last major drawback to ball pythons is that they live fairly long lives. They can live to be 20 to 30 years old or older, and because of this, it is a long-term commitment. And I don't think that there is necessarily anything wrong with purchasing a pet, purchasing a ball python, and keeping that animal for 5, 6, 7, 10 years even, and then your lifestyle changes to the point where it doesn't make sense to keep keeping that animal and you rehome it. But because they live for so long and they're such hardy animals, it does create a situation where if you are not expecting an animal to live for that length of time, it may require work on your part as a pet keeper to make sure that that animal is going to be cared for later on if something changes in your life and you can't be the one to provide that care. And then often what happens is people will look into rescues or shelters, but many shelters that we think of for cats and dogs don't take reptiles, and a lot of the rescues for reptiles are questionable at best. And really, in our experience, a lot of the rescues that we find for reptiles are just people who want to get more animals for either free or very, very little money, and oftentimes because they're bringing in so many different animals from questionable sources, those animals are rampant with disease or mites or things like this. So I say all of this, that if it becomes a situation where you need to rehome an animal because they live so long, it can be difficult finding a good home for that animal to go to. And I do think that this is a drawback for keeping ball pythons. So while we've gone over the 5 major drawbacks of ball pythons, I do want to end this video on a positive note, and I genuinely think that ball pythons are some of the best pets that anybody can have, and I think that they are one of the best first pet reptiles that people can purchase because ball pythons are fairly docile, so you can hold them. They are fairly hardy, so they can handle a little bit of neglect, even if it isn't intentional, while you figure out how to care for the species without providing any long-term harm to the animal. And last one, that I think that ball pythons are amazing animals for especially first pet reptiles, but really anybody who is interested in a non-traditional pet, is that ball pythons come at every single price point. You can get them for as cheap as $30 to $40 all the way up to $30,000 to $40,000. And this allows you to find the exact right animal for your budget that fits you in your own individual characteristics and find an animal that will fit your family perfectly. And because of this, I think that ball pythons are incredible pets, and I think that they will always have a place in the reptile hobby. Anyways, we hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, again, please don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe, but we will see you next week.